I want to go out of the centre to the edge now, to Fisherman's Bend. And Janet, I know that this is an issue close to your heart. What are the big issues that need to be resolved now at Fisherman's Bend, and what can the council do about them?
Okay, well, Fisherman's Bend, biggest game in town. Makes Ackland Street, Fitzroy Street, these are... And I mean, I see this as quite a challenge for the council because, everywhere their constituents and their people who care passionately about the places where they live. And Fisherman's Bend, all 485 hectares of it, the biggest urban renewal project in Australia. And it hasn't got very much of a resident population. So I suppose my question to the candidates, I've got, and the people on the panel, got a number of questions, but I suppose, as an incoming council, what will be the critical moves you will make in order to ensure that Fisherman's Bend progresses in a livable direction and that the recently recast vision, is delivered?
So, Catherine, can I come to you first on that? What's your answer
absolutely.
to that?
Well, just to give context, my background's as a planning and environment lawyer, so I'm really quite excited about the opportunities that are present in Fisherman's Bend, but I think, like many in our community, we do hold grave concerns about how we see some of the nice words in the vision come to reality and come to be. We know that there is huge scope to create a city of the future, to make sure that there is a good mix of housing available in that area, which might go to address some of the affordability concerns that we've heard raised tonight. And crucially, we're going to need to see investment in the kind of infrastructure, sustainable and active transport, some education and childcare facilities to support the area as well. So there is a really great concern that I think it's very important that in this incoming council, it's a crucial period for the planning in the area. We are going to need people on council who are committed to standing up for the community's interest. And I think it's probably a good time to mention that the Greens candidates have committed. The Greens do not take donations from development companies, and our candidates have reaffirmed our commitment to that principle this election. Voters shouldn't have to worry about the community's interest being represented when it comes to decisions on this matter. And we're going to need people on this council who are prepared to stand up and advocate. There's a huge state government element to what's going to occur in Fisherman's Bend, and we're going to need people who are prepared to fight for our community and what it needs.
Okay, so could I just say, for the other people who are going to respond, very difficult to anticipate the needs of a community that's not there yet. And so how will you be thinking about that? And it's certainly my belief and hope that there's not a single candidate who's taking developer donations, let alone those that are dealing with Fisherman's Bend. So I suppose, just picking up John's questions, this is about, what are you going to do? What are you going to do differently?
I'm going to go to Richard first, if you don't mind. Richard, are you taking any donations from bourgeois developers?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. And look, I agree with Kat. I do think one of the fundamental things is we never want to underestimate the power of that development community to influence decisions, maybe at the state and federal level and maybe at council. But so advocacy for the community about Fisherman's Bend is number one. I agree with Kat totally. Look, the second thing is I do think the council and has been making a good effort to sort of provide the technical and sort of social and design and everything else input. They have been highly critical of what's being proposed there. I've worked with Janet and here. Jen, sorry. Jen. So we've got to keep the council's technical critique, but cooperate with the state as well. But at the same time, we need to be, I think, a louder voice about trying to get better outcomes. I think the council's been doing the good work at the technical level and inputting into the process, but I don't think there's been the council advocacy about highlighting to the community the issues down there, because they are so ginormous, it's just not funny. So I think the council's been doing a good job on that technical side. I think the advocacy is really important.
Jennifer?
I was going to wait until the candidates had all had their say, but I'll jump in now. For me, the enormity of the issues at Fisherman's Bend highlight for me the importance of where this conversation tonight began, which was on the issue of appointing a new CEO. This goes to my point about you will have a new council coming in. We know several of them will be brand new councillors. They will not be trained in the complexities of Fisherman's Bend, let alone any of the other issues we've talked about tonight. And it is so complex, and it is so driven by the state government, the influence and the capacity of council to drive the agenda at Fisherman's Bend. It is absolutely all about advocacy and political gamesmanship, and it's tough. It's really tough.
Dick, what would you like to add? And I'm going to come to Oggy in a moment because this is an issue of interest to him as well to respond. But what would you like to say?
Well, look, okay, I'm going to be the bad guy. I'm nauseated by the boosterism about Fisherman's Bend that has gone on for the past 3 years.
Why so?
Sorry, Dick, the boosterism.
The boosterism because what happened was with Matthew Guy, it was the worst, in terms of dollars, land scandal in Australia's history, because there has been a massive transfer of wealth from government to private landowners in that area, and we're going to be paying that price for 50 years. So I think that any incoming local government has to sort of say, listen, state government, your predecessors, and you're bound as successors entitled by your predecessors' action, were appalling, and they've meant, it's so huge. There's going to be 5 or 6 new schools. There's going to be massive obligations for the local government to provide social infrastructure. It's going to be hugely expensive. We've just paid $10 million for a open space that if Matthew Guide had half a brain, we should have only paid $2 million. There was no planning. It's a complete mess. The built form is far too generous in terms of height. And, you can go to some of the areas around Fisherman's Bend, like, say, Thistlethwaite Street in South Melbourne, which is now industrial, abutting sensitive areas in Port Melbourne and South Melbourne, and they've got plans there and approvals for 30 stories.
But you're effectively crying over spilled milk, though, aren't you? What would you do about it?
What I would do about it was fierce advocacy and go straight to the heart of that debate and call it a spade a damn shovel and say to the state government, you have to help us pay for that social infrastructure. It is completely beyond...
But Dick, you've been on council before and you lobbied the state government to help out with the Palais, and we got zip. It ain't that easy.
It's not that easy, but on the other hand, we can't let the state government and its predecessors get away with... And you have to understand that, before his heart attack, Dick gave 3 massive approvals.
Oh, he's still
and that people are coming basically to the city of Port Phillip for their new approvals, not the city of Melbourne, because the city of Melbourne are tighter on it.
No, Dick.
No. Jen, we have been servile. We have been insufficiently protective of the interests of the future and current residents of Port Phillip. And it's a real drama for us. Financially, it's a real drama.
I'm just questioning your imputation that the City of Port Phillip can only approve to a very, what is it, Janet? 4 stories. The big ones are approved by the Minister.
It's a state absolutely, but there's no pressure. I've spoken to senior journalists who say that they've been taken on tours of Fisherman's Bend by the CEO and the then mayor, who were, just gooing about how fantastic it was going to be. You know.
I'd like to pick up, Andrew, on your point where you're saying that maybe this is spilt milk. You know, we've now got to make the best of a bad job. And just coming back to our earlier discussions about Ackland Street and Fitzroy Street, in the recast vision, the vision is for an 80-20 modal split, 80% in favour of walking, cycling and public transport, only 20% by motorised vehicles. And I suppose I'm just really interested to know, just seeing how difficult it's been to implement those sort of targets, even in a small project like Ackland Street, you know, whether you will become advocates for this vision that has been spelled
And
out.
I'm going to ask that of Oggy too, because Oggy is standing as a candidate, and this is an issue that you've campaigned on. Listening to what's been said there,
Yeah, thank
will you take up the cudgels on this issue?
So I'm going to the point that Janet made, which is that we are trying to cater for a community that's not already there. I mean, I've door knocked throughout Port Melbourne and South Melbourne. There is a community there that is incredibly worried about the future of Fisherman's Bend. I think it's right to say that the problem exists in the way that the zoning was organised. The whole area being capital city zone means that really any development goes. So as nicely worded as the recast vision is, it's very hard for us to make sure that the state government provides for all of those things. I think that if you want an example of how not to undertake planning, you need to look no further than Fisherman's Bend. While earlier plans of Fisherman's Bend included mandatory high limits, the goal of carbon neutrality, affordable and developer contributions for social housing, it seems like this has really been scrapped. And there are currently no mandatory height limits or minimum dwelling sizes, no binding master plan in place, urban design strategy, or money for new roads, public transport, schools, parks, and all of the shops and amenities that are required for a well-functioning community and society. I think there's so much work to be done around Fisherman's Bend. I think the state government needs to, in my point of view, probably look at some of the zoning and organise for that accordingly. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult for us to achieve a place that's easily accessible and livable and ensures a good standard of living for the people there.
Yeah, if I could comment, look, Oggy's right. I have to give credit. I do think the state government is trying hard. You know, they've got a task force now, and I think they're quite professional. It just takes time, you know. They've been given a piece of junk, really, by the last government, so they're working hard. And I think, you know, they've got a vision. They've now got to put it into a plan, but I think they have the right intention. So we've got to be guardians of that. But to Janet's point, I think it has to be 80-20. You've got the dimensions of the issue. There's 107,000 people living in the whole of Port Phillip now. They're talking about putting 80,000 people there. They can't have
80,000 residents plus 40,000 workers.
Yeah, so, you know, it's got to be a precinct. But, you know, in my view, and the submissions we've made to the state, is that it needs a subway system. It can't be done by surface, but it's got to be a loop. It can't be just a dead end that goes into Fisherman's Bend and then out again. It's got to be a loop to the west so that it connects through the whole city, because the workforce that will come there will come from all over Melbourne, and so will the residents. So.
Just a last comment on this and we'll move on to another topic.
I guess this is a comment really to other people here who are in the audience, that if you're not aware of Fisherman's Bend, please try and become aware of it and become knowledgeable about it, because it will impact the whole city of Port Phillip. It won't just impact...
4 decades.
Yeah, 4 decades. It won't just impact Port Melbourne. We will all feel it. And there is... the constraints on council in terms of having an influence are not to be dismissed. And it's a very difficult role for council. Dick, you talk about standing up and advocating, but I've worked in state government and I know how punishing a state government can be to local councils when they stand up for their local communities. So it's a very tricky
But Jen, the
exercise.
interesting thing was that the big stick that was held at the time was that, we'll take it out of Port Phillip and stick it into Melbourne. You know, I wish that had happened.
Yeah.
I wish that had happened, because Melbourne would have been more vigilant than the current mob were on planning, and secondly, they've got the dough to pay for it.
Yeah. I don't think it's about vigilance. It is about expertise and money, and Melbourne has that. And, you know, so I can't disagree with you, Dick. I think it might have been a better solution.
Are you saying it's too hard?
I'm saying it's too expensive, and it's too hard now that...
It sounds like it almost sounds like you've capitulated on it, really.
No. Fundamental early decisions have been made. So, you know, a lot of development and development applications were dealt with before there was a proper strategic plan. I mean, this is absolutely consistent with the state government. You know, they stuffed up Docklands. You know, they put their big paw print over Fishermans Bend, and now they're, you know, buggering up South Bank.